As far as sci-fi fandom is concerned, few theories have been as outrageous and intriguing at the same time as the idea that the Chronicles of Riddick and even Judge Dredd in Event Horizon could fit into the Warhammer 40k universe. At first glance, these films and IPs have no explicit link to Games Workshop's grimdark future, and yet it's not entirely difficult to piece together a shared universe as well as a timeline, and you could do so too if you looked at the aesthetic and thematic parallels between these IPs that make this crossover oddly convincing. In this video, we'll explore these very connections that range from a haunted starship's hellish voyage and the lawless streets of Mega City 1 to Riddick's battle against death-worshipping conquerors, and see how they all might tie into the Warhammer 40k mythos. And we'll also shed some light on the real-world inspirations behind these stories and why Warhammer's famous grimdark appeal and outlook can be found in so many modern sci-fi tales. Oh, but before we begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos in the future. And now, let's begin. Event Horizon is a warp drive to an unknown labyrinth like hell. So let's begin our journey with the 1997 film Event Horizon, which was a cult horror film about a spaceship that goes to hell and back. Now, this might sound similar to the concept of Hellraiser, and we've actually explored that in a separate video, by which we mean how Hellraiser and Event Horizon might be connected. In Event Horizon's near-future setting of 2040, humanity experiments with a new FTL, or faster-than-light technology, called a gravity drive. The starship Event Horizon uses this experimental drive and vanishes on its maiden jump. When it reappears in 2047 near Neptune, we learn that instead of vanishing, what it did was pretty much punch a hole through to a hellish dimension where its crew met fates that can be considered worse than death. The survivors who investigate find evidence of ritualistic torture, madness, and a vessel seemingly possessed by an evil sentience. Captain Miller, played by Lawrence Fishburne, ultimately sacrifices himself to destroy the cursed ship and save a few of his crew. To a Warhammer 40k fan, this plot sounds very familiar. In the Warhammer universe, starships travel through a hellish alternate dimension known as the Warp, which is full of demonic entities. Normally, they're protected by Geller fields to keep all sorts of evil entities out, but a ship translating into the Warp unshielded would be a recipe for exactly the kind of carnage Event Horizon has in store for its spacefarers. Many, like us, believe that the gravity drive accidentally opened a portal into Warhammer's Warp, which essentially makes Event Horizon an unofficial prequel to the 41st millennium. In the film, the crew's horrible torture and the ship's quote-unquote corruption by an evil force seems similar to what might happen if a vessel entered the Warp without protection. This fan theory is so well liked that even the film's creators have acknowledged the resemblance. According to fans, Event Horizon's director, Paul W.S. Anderson, and writer Philip Eisner have admitted to being Warhammer 40k enthusiasts and drew inspiration from it. In other words, the similarities aren't really accidental, not in any way, and the fact of the matter is that the screenwriter himself was reportedly a big 40k player and infused some of that nightmare fuel into the movie's premise. In fact, the notion of Event Horizon as a Warhammer prequel has become popular lore amongst us geeks. Event Horizon is essentially the Warhammer 40k movie, and even people only vaguely familiar with 40k notice the parallel. After all, the film's concept of a lost ship returning from a dimension of all things anarchy, terror, and horror fits into Warhammer's universe, which, by the way, insists that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and apparently ravenous daemons. If you think about the timeline, Event Horizon takes place in the 2040s, which could be a distant prelude to the birth of warp travel in humanity's future, long before the Emperor of Mankind arises in Warhammer lore. Whether or not one considers it canon, this connection demands a rewatch of the movie from the perspective of the game. Judge Dredd, Mega Cities, and the Road to the Imperium. Next, let's talk about Judge Dredd, and for the most part, we'll be considering the 2012 movie starring Karl Urban and not the one starring the Italian Stallion, and we don't think we need to tell you the reasons why. Anyways, Dredd was a pretty awesome film adaptation of the Judge Dredd comics, which many believe could show Earth on its way to the Warhammer 40k era. Judge Dredd's world is our own future, albeit with a 21st century nuclear war that ravages most of the planet. Given how wars are escalating globally, it doesn't seem too unlikely. Anyways, by the year 2142, humanity survives only inside massive megacities that are actually spread across continents, and the lands outside these so-called megacities are irradiated wastelands that are inhabited by mutants. Law and order in Megacity 1 are upheld by the judges, who are brutally efficient lawmen who, we must remind you, serve as judge, jury, and executioner on the streets. It's a dystopian setting, but one that will ring a lot of bells for people who consume a bit of Warhammer along with their breakfast in the morning. What we mean is, the cities in Dredd comics look like the embryonic stage of an Imperial hive city on future Terra. In Warhammer's backstory, the Age of Strife and constant warfare eventually push humanity into hive cities and authoritarian rule. The judges, with their unwavering enforcement, resemble nothing so much as the Adeptus Arbites, the Imperium's fanatical law enforcers. In fact, the original Judge Dredd comics in 2000 AD were a key inspiration for Warhammer's creators, and Games Workshop even published licensed Judge Dredd games and comics back in the day. The overlap is so strong that many have long accepted Judge Dredd's world as a possible part of the 40k lore. According to some hardcore fans, Dredd, and by extension the broader 2000 AD universe, takes place long after the events of Event Horizon, but before the Warhammer 40k's present day, which is too far into the future. The idea is that humanity was shaken by the Event Horizon incident. Maybe the demons were let loose into our world, or we sent more probes to explore what lay beyond our understanding and comprehension. Whatever the case may be, instead of abandoning FTL experiments and focusing on surviving on Earth, something flipped, which led to the nuclear world war from the Dredd universe. By 2142, society hadn't entirely collapsed, but it was hanging on by a thread in these mega cities, and a few hundred years later, maybe one of the judges or someone else entirely became the emperor of mankind who united Terra during an era when Earth was just starting to resemble the oppressive, sprawling urban hives of Warhammer's future. In this theory, Dredd shows us how hive cities began and how the concept of super-authoritarian law enforcement, judges now, Arbites later, took root. And must we remind you how hive cities are basically huge, overcrowded cities sheltering humans from a ruined outside world? And it's not just the aesthetics. The judge's motto that fear is the best deterrent fits into the Imperium's draconian rule like a piece of a jigsaw. We even see mutated humans and fringe cults in Dredd's universe, which sounds like the early signs of chaos influence or genetic mutation. However, in Dredd's time, they're attributed to radiation and crime. The Necroongers, early Chaos Crusaders in Chronicles of Riddick. Finally, after the two introductory gigs, we've arrived at the main event for tonight, the Chronicles of Riddick, and of course, its related games. And trust you me, here's where everything truly goes into overdrive. So, the 2004 film, Chronicles of Riddick, is basically a space fantasy action flick that expands and explores the world of Richard B. Riddick, an anti-hero first introduced in the simpler monster-in-the-dark thriller, Pitch Black. In Chronicles, the titular character finds himself caught in the path of the Necroongers, who are a fanatical militaristic empire that sweep across the stars, converting or annihilating every colony that they find. The Necroongers' creed is join us or die, in service of their mysterious faith in the Underverse, a sort of promised land or afterlife dimension. They wear intimidating and imposing armor with pauldrons, and even more pauldrons, and wield an eclectic mix of weaponry, ranging from conventional firearms to energy cannons that are capable of burning entire worlds. Their leader, the Lord Marshal, is a superhuman warlord who has been to the Underverse and come back half dead, and this journey granted him uncanny powers to rip souls from living bodies. If all of this sounds Warhammer 40k in flavor, you're not alone in thinking so. It's hard not to notice that the Necroongers bear an uncanny resemblance to some of the dark factions of 40k. You see, both the Necromonger Empire and Warhammer's Imperium of Man are essentially militant, expansionist theocracies on a grand crusade. Both are adorned with gothic imagery and deathly iconography, and they're hell-bent on conquering or exterminating all in their path. Both glorify martial prowess, plug half-dead devotees into their machines, and have no qualms about destroying entire planets once they're of no use. Additionally, the Chronicles of Riddick shows an era of humanity either just before the Imperium's rise or during a turbulent period known in Warhammer lore as the Age of Strife. Now, there are a few possibilities that I think we should discuss in detail, so let's do that, shall we? Pre-Imperium, the late dark age of technology. In this scenario, Riddick's world takes place before humanity invents stable warp-based faster-than-light travel. Indeed, in the Riddick films, most ships don't have true FTL capabilities since they rely a lot on stuff like hypersleep and go for super long voyages, which means that faster-than-light tech is rare or non-existent. We see characters spend significant time in stasis pods to travel between planets. The exceptions are the Necroongers, who do seem to appear suddenly across vast differences. In fact, the Necromonger armada often simply presents itself directly over planets without any sign of movement. Unlike everyone else, they're never shown using sleeper pods. This could mean that the Necromongers have some form of genuine FTL travel. Now, you might ask how that could be if other civilizations don't. Well, if we connect the Riddick and Warhammer universes, then it's possible that the Necromongers discovered warp travel early, perhaps through evil means. But it does sound plausible. They could be the proto-chaos worshippers who learned forbidden secrets that let them jump through the warp or underverse when others couldn't. In Warhammer terms, maybe an upstart chaos deity, say someone like a nascent Tzinch, a chaos god of knowledge and sorcery, taught them that trick, or maybe their devotion to a death god protects them from demonic harm. This would make the Necromongers effectively the first sort of chaos cult army that roamed the stars while the rest of humanity was still figuring out basic interstellar travel. It's a compelling explanation for why Necromonger technology and tactics are so out of step with everyone else in Riddick's universe, because they're powered by the warp. It's a compelling theory, no? During the Age of Strife, Chaos Storms. Now, let's talk about an alternate timeline that kind of puts Riddick's saga much later in the Warhammer universe, more specifically in the middle of the Age of Strife, which, as some of you may know, is the millennia of anarchy before the Emperor's rise. That's roughly the 25th through 30th millennia. Now, this was also the time when warp storms cut off planets and made faster-than-light travel nearly impossible. In Warhammer lore, the Age of Strife saw human worlds isolated and often regressing, while psychers and mutants proliferated unchecked. In the theory, this matches the Chronicles of Riddick setting well. Most people can't travel long distances due to warp disruptions, hence the reliance on slow ships and sleeper pods. The Necromongers, however, would have a tremendous advantage because their chaos-linked warp capability lets them bypass the warp storms. They can simply blitzkrieg across sectors while other worlds are stranded. This also explains how the Necromonger Empire can conquer a half a galaxy seemingly out of nowhere. Several details in the films line up with this Age of Strife interpretation. For one, Earth is still referred to plainly as Earth by characters instead of Terra, as it's called in the Imperium, and is spoken of as a real place people could travel to. In fact, the character of Imam from the Riddick movies mentions that he's from Earth and that some are searching for a new Mecca among the stars because presumably the original Mecca on Earth is out of reach. If Earth had been cut off by warp storms or fallen to disaster, pilgrims would indeed be seeking a replacement holy site. Additionally, one of Riddick's travel companions, a merc named Paris, collects antiques from Earth and says that they're incredibly valuable, which would make sense if Earth had recently been lost or rendered inaccessible. These things pretty much mean that by Riddick's time, contact with Earth has been severed, which is similar to how many of the human planets lost contact with Terra during the Age of Strife. Meanwhile, the chaos and upheaval of that age would allow a force like the Necromongers to thrive. In fact, the Necromongers' campaign of galactic domination makes more sense during the Age of Strife when human governments are fragmented and warp travel is perilous, since they're taking full advantage of a darkness before the dawn of the Imperium. In either timeline, the Necromongers come across as an early incarnation of chaos from Warhammer. And this gives us the room to speculate which chaos gods the Necromonger religion might be linked to. Take Chaos Undivided, which is all about worshipping chaos in a general sense, or maybe the proto-cults of Nurgle with their morbid obsession with death, or even the Tzinch cults with their secret knowledge of crossing dimensions. It's also possible that the Necromongers are nothing more than one of the lost Space Marine legions, with the Lord Marshal as their Primarch, who turned into the Primordial Annihilator after glimpsing the Underverse. Maybe the Lord Marshal is seeking to lead his legion through the Eye of Terror, which Warhammer fans must know is a famous warp rift back into the Underverse, and every world they subjugate faces what we know as exterminatus, or in simpler terms, total planetary destruction. But you know what? Even beyond these broad strokes that we've spoken about up until now, the specific parallels between the Necromongers and Warhammer's factions are quite out there. The Necromongers' religious governance and convert or kill ethos sounds like the Imperium of Man at the height of the Great Crusade. The only difference is that the Imperium fights for the god emperor, whereas necromongers worship death itself. So yeah, not the same thing. In fact, another key philosophical difference is that the Imperium fanatically venerates a living, albeit horribly wounded god emperor and is xenophobic, whereas the necromongers seem willing to absorb any species or person so long as they bow to the necromonger faith. The necromongers' religion might thus align more with chaos cults or even the Necrons than the Imperium. Oh, and Necrons are ancient aliens who serve death gods. The necromongers could be like a primitive offshoot of the Necrons, and this becomes more believable given the similar names in death worship. Furthermore, the very name necromonger sounds like Necromunda, a hive world in Warhammer lore, but that could just be a coincidence. So there's that. And what of the one man who defies the necromongers? What of Riddick himself? In the Chronicles of Riddick, he's revealed to be one of the last Furians, a race of ferociously independent humans that the Lord Marshal tried to exterminate due to a prophecy that a Furian would kill him. Riddick's Furian heritage grants him extraordinary strength and a certain resistance to the necromongers' tricks. Notably, when the Lord Marshal attempts to tear Riddick's soul from his body, a very warpish attack, Riddick withstands it. This could be because Riddick is a blank, also known in 40k as a null or untouchable, a person born without a soul or psychic presence. In Warhammer, such individuals are immune to psychic powers and even sap the energy of warp entities around them. It would fittingly explain why the Lord Marshal's otherwise unstoppable soul-ripping power fails on him, startling the necromonger leader and giving Riddick the opening to strike him down. In Warhammer lore, the Emperor of Mankind himself took help from elite assassins called Nulls who could shrug off sorcery. Maybe the Emperor visited Furia at some point, or maybe that's just a bit too much conjecture on our part. The Quasi Dead. Now, another interesting parallel between the two IPs are the Quasi Dead used by necromongers. These are basically painfully preserved, half-dead telepaths who are used as navigators and seers for the necromonger fleet. They plug these mummified psychics into their ships to guide them. Warhammer's Imperium also relies on specialized psychers, like navigators with a third eye, and on half-dead human computers, like servitors and the Astronomicon's sacrificed psychers, to enable warp travel and communications. So both franchises have undead-looking figures wired into a throne, helping a ship navigate the metaphysical realms. By the end of the Chronicles of Riddick, our intrepid Furian anti-hero has vanquished the Lord Marshal, and by necromonger law, which says you keep what you kill, he unwillingly becomes the new leader of the necromonger empire. It's a very Conan the Barbarian style ending, or if you like, a grimdark and ironic situation where the renegade takes command of the very crusade he fought. Perhaps Riddick's reign is short-lived, or he disappears, maybe off to find his home world in the next sequel, as the 2013 movie Riddick indeed shows him more or less removed from power. Eventually, and if we're doing the whole fan theory thing, the Emperor of Mankind would come onto the scene to unite Terra and beyond, putting an end to factions like the Necromongers by either folding them into the Great Crusade or destroying them. In any event, the coincidences between Riddick's universe and Warhammer's lore are abundant enough that it tickles any 40k fan's imagination. Marvelous verdict! Is it about connections and shared universes, or is it just inspiration and coincidence? It's important to note that, as fun as these theories are, none of these connections are officially confirmed. We're firmly in the realm of fan speculation and tongue-in-cheek hypotheticals. The truth is, sci-fi works often share visual and thematic tropes simply because they influence each other and draw from common sources. Warhammer 40k was first released in 1987, and the first Riddick film came out in 2000. That's just a 13-year difference. Being from the same sci-fi culture has led to some shared DNA in the form of gothic imagery in space, militaristic religious empires, and more. But direct influence is harder to pin down. Director David Twohy wanted the necromongers to look unique, more high fashion meets fascist Rome than copy-pasted space marines. The film's production notes reveal that the art team drew inspiration from the works of Erte, an Art Deco sculptor and illustrator, and the armor designs of Filippo Negroli, a 16th century Italian master armorer. In other words, the necromonger look was born from the marriage of Art Deco and Renaissance rather than Warhammer's specific Gothic steampunk style. This aligns with the idea that Twohy's Riddick series channels a lot of Dune in its world building and visuals, like feudal politics, desert planets, quasi-religious orders, and not really Warhammer. That said, Warhammer itself was influenced by many earlier sci-fi and fantasy works, including Dune and 2000 AD comics like Nemesis the Warlock from the early 80s. So you could say Riddick and Warhammer 40k are cousins, drinking from the same well of ideas like crusading galactic empires and cool-looking skull armor. So yeah, that's every connection we could find between Warhammer 40k and Riddick, and we hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, consider leaving us a like and subscribing to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.